have an annual submissions process where artists send us their work. That's juried by our program committee with the board, and we then make an exhibition from those juried submissions. What we're essentially interested in with that jurying process is projects that can really only happen at the soap factory, and that projects that really expand the potential for an artist's work, the potential for that artist's expression. What I tend to do is we choose the best and most interesting of the submissions, the ones that will fit the space the best, and then looking at those artists and looking at those artists' works, themes or curatorial themes seem to kind of suggest themselves from that work. So when we give a show a title, that has sprung from that group of artists' work. And I see those titles and those themes as really a kind of organizing principle for the work, which perhaps allow an audience a way into thinking about the works and the artists that will be on display.
In terms of the show, I had already actually created most of the pieces and the ideas around them, but then Ben said that he was titling it Rossum's Universal Robots. And I thought that, wow, that seemed, you know, pretty apt in terms of my work.
At the end of the day, I make pots, so by default, I am a potter. But I don't do so maybe enthusiastically, or I don't make pots to be usable pots. I make them to be a little bit about use or about pottery, about the expectations that we have of handmade pottery especially. And then I think installation artist is probably the other side of that, that's working on these really great projects like the Soap Factory that takes the support of a gallery, and it takes a place that has an audience who will come in and interact and think about what they're doing.
Most of my work has been really very closely linked with industry, and specifically deindustrialization and sort of the possibilities after obsolescence. And so really I've taken factories and industrial architecture and machines as a major subject in these pieces. And since I heard about the Soap Factory, I've always been really fascinated by it, and sort of just waiting for a project to seem like it would justify the space here. And I'm just fascinated by the idea of working in this space, which was once a thriving industrial space, and which has had to find a new life, which was nearly destroyed and kind of came back.
So I'm building a replica based on the Soap Factory's building with two additions, which are aspects of the building which have since been demolished over the course of its life. And it's torqued and raised, so it's floating, you know. So I wanted to make sure that, you know, as people came, not just because it's a 3D object, but because things were happening with scale and torque, that it was different from everywhere you stood. Do you hear it? No?
Hear something, but...
Okay. Yeah, that's not holding much.
No, it ain't holding much. There, it's not holding anything now.
Right now, the struggle we're having is that the original plan was to essentially have a jack, like a 6-ton jack that we welded here, and that lifted this thing up off. But we decided that we wanted to try and actually float it. So we're now having counterbalance and cabling solutions.
My work is primarily a building project. I construct ceramic building blocks that are interlocking, that you could feasibly build anything with. I have two different generations of brick that I'm going to show here at the soap factory. The first are an earthenware set that are based on a cube, and so they sort of build ordinary spaces. Well, maybe not ordinary, but rectangular spaces that we're used to living in. The second set is a first generation of a brick design where they're based on equilateral pyramids, which eventually will create spaces which are spherical rather than rectangular.
My piece is a ceramics-based performative event. It's interactive with about 45 pictures that have been lent from community members and friends, lined up on a low shelf in front of a wall, and then around the corner in Gallery 3 is a series of narrow shelves. So the audience, the guests or participants, are invited to come in, help themselves to a glass of water from one of these pitchers, whatever they like, and then leave the used glass behind on the other shelf.
I made the glass forms that are in the show, and these glass forms that I blow glass into jeans to create this sort of interior volume of our bodies, the lower body. And then I also filled these jug-like forms that are very body-like as well with some lard that also relates back to the soap factory and their sort of beginning of having lard, like 6 inches of lard on the floor. So I wanted to create sort of this cavity and this excess, this sort of corpulent body that kind of sparks a conversation about what is inside versus outside our bodies, and being able to look through the transparent quality of the glass allows the viewer to look inside and have this sort of out-of-body experience and be able to look at the glass, you know, in their own narrative and their own way of thinking about their own bodies.
This is a piece Continua by Philadelphia-based artist Katie Murken. She's expecting a baby presently and therefore couldn't be here to install the work for us. The manufacture of this is really quite simple. These are discarded yellow pages and telephone directories which have been dyed using various natural and artificial pigments. Katie teaches color theory and is interested in the correspondences between each of these pillars. I think there's also an interest in the reuse of discarded materials. I think we can all relate to the truism that the telephone directory nowadays arrives at your front door and then just goes straight through the house into recycling and out the back door. The way that these were originally displayed when they were first shown, they were displayed in a hexagonal room. So each set of pillars related to each other across the room. So the color theory element of this piece, I think, was more explicit. What Katie's done for us here is to reconfigure the piece so that it is displayed in a linear fashion across 2 walls, slightly, I think it's slightly altered the way the piece is viewed, but I think it still retains its quite considerable sculptural impact.
I was working on projects that were investigating ethnic divisions that had been sort of engineered out of either colonial situations or Cold War situations. And I was making work that was kind of, these installation-based, and I would call them mobile temporary memorials. So I would install it, it would be kind of like a memorial for that event for a period of time, and then, once the exhibition was over, kind of fold it up and take it away. In doing so, I kind of got interested in looking at also monuments and how they function as memorials, and sort of the changing roles of monuments, or sort of not even changing, but kind of mutable roles of monuments in the lives of nations and neighborhoods and communities. So the first phase of this project is to triangulate monuments in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And these, as you know, were one country in colonial times as undivided India. And in 47 and 71, two very bloody, very violent partitions later, they are now 3 countries. I'm making latex casts of monuments in each of these 3 countries. While they're geographically, forever kind of separated now, and visa policies and border situations being what they are in the subcontinent, the idea is to kind of bring the skin of these monuments together in exhibitions like this. This one is from Bangladesh. This one's from Pakistan. This one's from Bangladesh.
I see this as a sort of the kind of death. Each of these images are sort of overly burdened, and I see it as a kind of a death that signifies change, really. That's what the pieces are about. In particular, the video that I'm working on, which I'm calling Glamour's 3 Acts, was inspired by, actually I was at a Richard Prince show, and he was doing a video pretty much around the same idea on glamour, but he was using Lindsay Lohan. And I thought that was very interesting. And I thought of these things that had a certain standard or a certain quality, a certain idea, and how over time those ideas change. And I just wondered really immediately if Lindsay Lohan could stand up to past ideas around beauty and glamour. So that's sort of how that came about.
I will be showing 4 photographs and 1 video. The photograph and the video show underwater landscape. I am using a underwater housing for my camera, and I take picture and video under the water. The work is an environmental critique. I basically try to show our connection to these underwater landscape, the way we inhabit, the way we use them, and in my opinion, it's not a very harmonious relationship.
Gallery is this massive battery of 600 glass vessels, each with these etching-powered cells in it. And then a series of gears rising over top of it, which essentially spool the wire. One of these gears is made out of copper etching plates, which I've carefully etched and then cut and then soldered back together. But before soldering them, I printed them and made a second version, which is its mirror image, and those two are working in combination, this paper and this copper gear. And then those are leading to a series of wires which will weave throughout the space and into these power tools and this shiny surface in the gallery.
I'm really interested in notions of propriety and taste and how those are communicated by the objects that we use in our houses, our homes. So ceramics for me is a really great entry point into the kinds of design choices and identities that people make. So I have kind of two parallel sides to my practice. One is events like this that somehow use pottery to engage people and engage them to think about their practices, their tastes, their houses. And then a more pottery-driven side that is actually creating dishes, vessels, pots that confront ideas of propriety, expectations, use, but that's not participatory. That's just a commercial object sort of side to my practice.
I think of my work like there's a lot of color in my work, and as I construct, I think a lot about painting and how each piece, even though they're very geometric, is almost like a stroke of paint or a stroke of color. So I'm really thinking about painting, and they're very highly engineered or designed to both function in a way that you can build with, but then also function aesthetically. So I feel like the engineering also fits into the work. And the ceramics is also very technical, so I love that technical aspect as well as the aesthetic aspect of it.
I'm not trying to make a replica of the soap factory's building, but I am trying to reference it, at least, you know, an object. And underneath it, on one corner, there'll be an accumulation of materials that will talk about the history of the site, of the building, of the activities within it. There's a dig site next door because they're building, and so I went digging with the kind of project manager for the building next door. And he's really into scuba diving, so when we were out, he was kind of, you know, I came from the sort of experience of discovery, looking through the dirt and mud. So that really opened my eyes in a way that I couldn't have been luckier to have with me. The question that I had is, what was here before the railroads? You know, was this farmed land? Was it Indian land? Who lived here? How? So as much as possible, I'll have also, you know, rocks from the Mississippi and other things. Well, so we'll see.
It's black. And I wet down these jeans, so I get them kind of damp, and they're just, you know, regular thrift store. I go and grab like 20 pairs of thrift store pants. All different sizes. So I gather is like every time I go into the glass tank, that's the furnace that's full of glass, every time I get some glass out of it on top of the next one, it's called a gather. So I get probably about 6 gathers on a large pipe. This is the blowing apparatus. And then I take that bubble and I shape it a little bit. I sort of make it almost like a butt cheek form to begin with, and then get it super hot and then go straight up and down and blow directly into the jeans, and there's a lot of smoke and fire and kind of craziness, and you know, you got people with air hoses, and people tell me when to blow, when to stop blowing, so you know the form doesn't get too thin. So you know, it's a really performance-based art piece in a way too.
Basically decided to do something with icons and idols. I'm really interested in the longevity of these things, how they persist, persevere through the generations. And as we look and the future's happening right now all around us, I'm really interested in especially some of the older imagery, the older icons, and how they're bearing up, how they're lasting, and how we take them. So I am creating works around saviors and goddesses, love, you know, things with having to do with beauty and glamour, and also sort of religious or spiritual imagery as well.
for many years now. And I think it's been an evolution in my work to start to work at this scale on, I have to actually get permissions from all kinds of officials to work on these public sites. My process takes several days, and it's all out in the public. So it's definitely sort of pushed my practice in almost an anthropological direction, where being on site is critical to the project. So it's not an armchair project. It involves a lot of site work in addition to research in several formats.
Within most of my recent work, I've been really trying to push the boundaries of printmaking and pushing specifically the role of the etching plate beyond its normal concluding point. Typically, a printmaker, after they're finished with their plate, will either flip it over and work on the back side or stick it in a drawer and put next through it. And that's their way of closing the edition. I've taken an approach which simultaneously makes the etching plate obsolete, but at the same time gives it a second life. So, for instance, one of my projects, I was soldering the plates together to create sculptures from them. Another one involved just a very manual process of scraping away at the surface until there's very little left of the image. And those have been my ways of closing the edition and of sort of bringing the etching plate beyond its logical concluding point.
Experience of having touched these sites of memory, capturing that, making that tangible through these latex panels, and then putting them in very close physical proximity of each other. So it's kind of triangulating these very dense sites of memory.
I'll have 3 video screens, 4 projections, 3 on screens. One will be projected directly into a bricked-in window space. When I came to Soap Factory for my exploratory visit, I saw this bricked-in window space in the back of the gallery area I was going to be using, and I just sort of got inspired to think about it as a space of, I don't know, an altar or a religious space. I thought about stained glass in that space, and I just literally created a virtual stained glass piece to go in that space. And that piece is titled Stained Glass, and I wanted to evoke the memory or a loss even of certain spiritualities, especially in terms of the ongoing or oncoming secularization in the modern eras. And then I'm doing a piece in a standard definition on television, and it's an archetypal savior piece.
It's not really that important that people know it's lard, but it is a lard, which I think is sort of a beautiful color. It's just a really beautiful creamy white, which also relates back to many of our own fluids that are similar colors. And also I kind of am trying to bring this more animalistic mix into there to create this sort of uneasiness and bring us back to our own natures, that these are acts that happen in nature every day to humans and to animals and to everything. It's not necessarily like the idea, but it is definitely an undertone, sort of creating these stands almost for them to rest on and sort of taking this breath. Because they almost sort of speak, I want them to sort of be speaking and the breath to be flowing out of the orifice, which is the hole that is obviously the place for glass artists, you would know, it's the place where we break it off the pipe. So it is like the place where air was pushed into the form. So now that they're off the pipe, they're sort of able to breathe out. And I think that's really important as well for the people to tie that to, like, what are they doing? Are they breathing? Are they speaking? Are they whispering? And I think that also creates another uneasiness for the viewer to sort of take in as they're surrounding the work.
I go through a long process of design, starting with drawing, then moving to clay models, and then moving to plaster models. I work pretty consistently, working back from the positive form to the negative form, and then in the end, you know, they're all fitting parts, so there's no distinction between what was positive and what was negative. But I start with the models, and then I make molds of the models, and then I primarily press mold, and then just start repeating, and then I get into a space, and then I start working in the space, and then I decide what to build based on the space and the other work in the space, and you know what's going on around.
I'm creating something that I've tried on a small scale and it seemed to be working, but when I get this large, it may not work. So I'm certainly taking quite a risk here with this project, but I guess I feel like I'm trying to push the limits of what printmaking can be and push the limits of the inefficiency of an industrial process.
I realized we made a mistake on one of the 600 cells because there was 2 copper plates in it when I went to take it apart. And the liquid turned like an emerald green. I mean, it had 60 volts, but it only had 2 amps, so it was like just not enough to do it.
And so I'm just really fascinated by, first of all, what the mistakes that people make when they're sort of obsessed with industry and obsessed with growth, but also the ways that people have to adapt after they've taken it too far. And so in this way, I think this project that I'm creating really speaks to that.
Bodies of water that I work with are usually very polluted. They're altered landscape. And my art practice is a environmental, social, and urban critique, urban development critique. So I've been like doing photograph of altered landscape for a long time. I've been working since '96 now. And it's basically like my main subject. Like before being an artist or studying in art, in my early 20s, I worked with Greenpeace. So I was already interested in these questions and the way we inhabit the earth and with the future of the earth.
Did you get any of the stuff, colors of dirt down here with the shells in it?
No, they're shells. You see these rocks and you know they're from the Mississippi, and you know that the shore of the Mississippi was where we are standing, you know, and that is not a small thing to be looking at bedrock that's thousands of years old. And so what I wanted was the history of the building and the site to be revealed. So using what came from the earth, and that's the history that I was a little more interested in. And we found an arrowhead and shells, which just blew my mind.
Yeah, that's good.
You found an arrowhead. And I used that to cast in its striations a pyramid. And I couldn't get the pyramid as tall as I would have liked, but beyond that, you know, it sort of does the job of tipping or visually tipping the sculpture, which, you know, I think is just And what I wanted was the history of the building and the site to be revealed. So using what came from the earth, and that's the history that I was interested in.
I use myself a lot in my work, I think, first of all, because, well, it was easy and I always showed up. And then I also like the multiplicity of that, where I would take on certain personas. You know, I think that's very current, very relevant to the times we live in.
The trick with a piece that you're supposed to interact with is how do you direct people to do that, and then how do they follow the rules, break the rules? The rules are not really clearly defined. So it's great at events like this when there's a lot of people around that they kind of catch on to the idea, and I think that's happening right now. And I mean, it's on the label and it's a little bit self-explanatory as you see the pitchers, first of all, and then the little plastic cups, and then around the corner, the cups that are partially full of water, not full of water that have been used. And then they kind of accumulate throughout the duration of the night or the duration of the show.
There was a lot that changed in my piece, and I had planned to cast all these different objects, and I just ran short because there were so many kind of major hitches, no pun intended, on the work. But what ended up happening was better than what I could have predetermined.
I guess I was creating something which was in some ways about waste and about failure and about inefficiency, and always knew there was a possibility of failure, and I guess I would say that to a certain extent the battery was a failure. It did work to an extent. It powered a palm sander in a way that it would turn, but not very fast. And so I guess one thing I did realize is just possibly the limits of this whole battery process, and the fact that it might still be possible, but it might not be at all. It powered just enough to kind of slowly turn this palm sander for us, and I guess we'll see the next time. Maybe the next time I do it, it'll work quite well.